It was July 21st, 1975, at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum on Long Island, New York. The humidity outside was suffocating at 89 degrees, but inside the packed arena, the temperature had climbed to nearly 95 degrees from the collective body heat of 30,000 screaming fans. Elvis was halfway through his intimate acoustic performance of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" when disaster struck in the most unexpected way. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in rock and roll history, proving that sometimes the greatest performances come from the most unplanned moments. The evening had started like any other Elvis concert in 1975. The King was at the height of his Vegas-era popularity, commanding stages across America with the same magnetic presence that had captivated audiences for 2 decades. But this particular show was special for one reason. Elvis had decided to include an extended acoustic segment, something he'd been experimenting with recently as a way to showcase his vocal range and connect more intimately with his audiences. The decision to go acoustic had been Elvis's idea entirely, much to the concern of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, and his band members. In an era when rock concerts were getting louder, bigger, and more theatrical, Elvis wanted to strip things back, to remind people that beneath all the jumpsuits and stage lights was a voice that could move mountains with nothing but a guitar for accompaniment. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime rhythm guitarist and closest musical confidant, had been initially skeptical. "Elvis, you sure about this?" he'd asked during rehearsals the week before. 30,000 people in an arena, and you want to sit down with just a guitar? But Elvis had been determined. "Charlie, I started with nothing but a guitar and a dream. Sometimes you got to go back to where you came from to remember who you are." The acoustic guitar Elvis had chosen for this segment was a 1969 Martin D28, a beautiful instrument with a rich, warm tone that had been custom-fitted for his hands. The guitar had sentimental value too. It was a gift from his father Vernon on Elvis's 34th birthday, engraved with the words, "To my son, who gave the world music, love, Daddy." The Martin had seen hundreds of hours of use in Elvis's Graceland music room, where he would often retreat late at night to work on new arrangements or simply play for his own pleasure. The guitar's spruce top had developed the kind of patina that only comes from years of loving use, and its tone had mellowed into something truly special. But guitars, even expensive ones, are delicate instruments. The strings, made of bronze-wound steel, are under tremendous tension, nearly 200 pounds of pressure across all 6 strings. In the humid summer heat of Long Island, with the stage lights blazing down and the temperature climbing, metal expands and contracts in ways that can stress even the finest instruments. Elvis had been performing for nearly an hour when he signaled to the band that it was time for the acoustic segment. The stage lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, and 30,000 people who had been screaming and cheering suddenly grew quiet with anticipation. There's something almost magical about the moment when a rock concert transforms into an intimate musical experience. And Elvis was a master at creating those moments. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice carrying that distinctive Memphis drawl that had charmed the world, "I want to take you back with me for a few minutes, back to a time when it was just me, a guitar and a song. No band, no lights, no fancy costumes, just music, the way it was meant to be." He settled onto the wooden stool that had been placed center stage, the Martin guitar cradled in his arms like an old friend. The arena fell into the kind of reverent silence usually reserved for churches and concert halls. Even the vendors in the aisles stopped selling concessions, sensing that something special was about to happen. Elvis began with the gentle finger-picking introduction to "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" The notes floated through the arena's sound system with crystalline clarity, each one perfectly placed and beautifully articulated. This wasn't the bombastic Elvis of Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock. This was the vulnerable, introspective Elvis that few people ever got to see. His voice, when he began to sing, was pure velvet. Without the backing of a full band, every nuance, every breath, every subtle inflection was laid bare for the audience to hear. The song, originally recorded by Elvis in 1960, had always been one of his more intimate numbers, but performed solo with just acoustic guitar, it became something transcendent. The crowd was mesmerized. 30,000 people sat in complete silence, hanging on every word, every note. In the front rows, you could see tears streaming down faces as Elvis's voice wrapped around them, like a warm embrace. This was why they'd come, not just for the spectacle, but for these moments of pure, unfiltered artistry. Elvis was approaching the song's most delicate passage, the part where his voice drops to almost a whisper, when it happened. The high E string, the thinnest and most delicate of the guitar's 6 strings, snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the arena's sound system like a gunshot. The broken string whipped across Elvis's hand, leaving a thin red line across his knuckles, and the guitar's tone immediately became hollow and incomplete. For a moment, Elvis stopped singing entirely. The silence in the arena became even more profound, if such a thing were possible. 30,000 people held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. This was live performance, at its most vulnerable. No safety net, no second takes, just a man, a broken guitar, and an audience waiting to see how he would handle the crisis. Most performers would have stopped the song, called for a backup guitar, or made some kind of joke to fill the awkward silence. But Elvis Presley wasn't most performers. He looked down at the broken string for just a moment, then back up at the audience, with that famous crooked smile spreading across his face. Without missing a beat, he adjusted his fingering to compensate for the missing string and continued playing, his voice picking up exactly where it had left off. But something incredible happened in that moment of adaptation. The guitar, now missing its highest voice, had a different tone, deeper, warmer, more melancholy. And Elvis, perhaps sensing the change, modified his vocal approach to match. His voice became more intimate, more conversational, as if he were singing directly to each person in that vast arena. "You know, folks," he said softly into the microphone, never stopping his guitar playing, "sometimes things don't go according to plan. Sometimes the string breaks right when you need it most." He paused, letting a gentle chord ring through the arena. "But that's when you find out what you're really made of." The crowd began to murmur with appreciation, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elvis continued the song, but now it had become something entirely different. The missing string forced him to play in a different key, to find new chord voicings, to approach the melody from unexpected angles. What had started as a faithful rendition of a classic song had transformed into something completely original, a one-of-a-kind performance that could never be replicated. "Are you lonesome tonight?" he sang, his voice now filled with a vulnerability that seemed to come from the broken string itself. "Do you miss me tonight?" The questions hung in the air, made more poignant by the guitar's altered sound. But Elvis wasn't finished. As he reached the song's spoken word section, he made another spontaneous decision that would become the stuff of legend. "You know what?" he said, stopping his guitar playing entirely and speaking directly to the crowd. "This broken string reminds me of something. It reminds me that we're all a little broken sometimes. We all have pieces of ourselves that don't work quite the way they're supposed to." He held up the guitar, showing the dangling broken string to the audience. "But you know what? Sometimes being broken is what makes us beautiful. Sometimes it's the cracks that let the light in." The arena erupted, not in screams or cheers, but in applause. The kind of respectful, emotional applause that acknowledges something profound has just happened. 30,000 people were on their feet, but it wasn't the usual Elvis hysteria. It was recognition of artistry, of humanity, of a moment that transcended entertainment and became something deeper. Elvis set the guitar aside and stood up, walking to the edge of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena, "that broken string just taught me something. It taught me that perfection isn't what makes music beautiful. What makes music beautiful is the heart behind it, the spirit that refuses to quit even when things don't go according to plan. The crowd's applause grew louder, more sustained. People were crying openly, moved not just by the music, but by the philosophy, by the grace with which Elvis had handled an unexpected challenge. But Elvis wasn't done surprising them. "Now I could ask for another guitar," he said with a grin, "or I could show you something even better." He walked back to the stool and picked up the Martin again. "I'm going to finish this song with 5 strings instead of 6. Because sometimes 5 strings and a lot of heart are better than 6 strings and no soul." What happened next was pure magic. Elvis began playing a completely improvised arrangement of the song's ending, using the 5 remaining strings to create harmonies and melodies that the original arrangement had never contained. His voice soared over the altered guitar, finding new meanings in familiar lyrics, turning a technical failure into an artistic triumph. The crowd was mesmerized. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a master class in adaptability, creativity, and the power of the human spirit to transform obstacles into opportunities. When Elvis finally struck the last chord, a beautiful, open-tuned resolution that used all 5 remaining strings, the arena exploded in the loudest, most sustained applause of the entire concert. 30,000 people were on their feet, cheering not just for the music, but for the reminder that greatness isn't about perfection, it's about how you handle imperfection. Elvis stood up and bowed deeply, then held the broken guitar above his head like a trophy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I want to thank this broken string for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Sometimes the best performances come from the worst accidents." After the show, Elvis kept that guitar exactly as it was, broken string and all. It went with him on the rest of the tour, and he would often tell the story of that night in Nassau to other musicians, using it as an example of why live performance was so much more rewarding than studio work. "In the studio," he would say, "if a string breaks, you just start over. But on stage, when a string breaks, that's when the real music begins." The guitar now sits in a place of honor at Graceland, the broken string still dangling from its tuning peg, a reminder of the night when 30,000 people learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. Years later, musicians would talk about the Nassau string break as one of the greatest examples of professional grace under pressure in rock and roll history. It became a touchstone for how to handle live performance disasters, a reminder that the audience isn't looking for perfection, they're looking for authenticity. But for those 30,000 people who were there that night, it was something even more precious. It was a reminder that we're all beautifully broken, that our flaws don't disqualify us from greatness. They make our greatness more meaningful. And it was proof that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was not just a great performer, but a great human being who understood that the best art comes not from hiding our imperfections, but from embracing them and finding ways to make them beautiful.